Hello, and welcome to State Scoop's Priorities Podcast. I'm Sophia Fox-Sowell, a reporter for State Scoop. This week, John Davisson from the Electronic Privacy Information Center and Theo Oshiro from the nonprofit Make the Road States join the podcast to discuss the new legal challenge against the Trump administration's effort to expand federal access to the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, known as TANF. The lawsuit, led by the nonprofit Democracy Forward, argues that the new data sharing policy could put families' personal information in the hands of immigration enforcement and other federal agencies. But first, here are the biggest state IT stories of the week. Months of backlash across social media and public forums over law enforcement's use and misuse of automated license plate readers, particularly Flock Safety's cameras and data sharing network, have prompted scrutiny of how the technology is deployed and governed, forcing changes from the industry. Flock has announced a series of changes to its policies, but the company says the most substantive changes must come from law enforcement and policymakers. The Administration for Children and Families is awarding $6 million to 10 child welfare jurisdictions to pilot predictive analytics tools designed to help caseworkers make faster, better informed decisions about children and families. The awards build on ACF's broader A Home for Every Child initiative, which seeks to improve the ratio of foster homes to children. California Governor Gavin Newsom has announced a new initiative that would create AI cybersecurity officer roles within each state agency. The governor also directed all California agencies to establish an AI cyber defense program, which will use AI for the purposes of vulnerability detection, network hardening, and incident response. A coalition of advocacy and privacy groups this month filed a lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's effort to expand federal access to sensitive data collected through the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, known as TANF, managed by the Department of Health and Human Services. The expansion would give other federal and state agencies, particularly the Department of Homeland Security, access to information about current and former TANF recipients. The lawsuit argues that HHS's move violates federal laws governing the privacy and disclosure of TANF data, including the TANF statute, the Social Security Act, the Privacy Act of 1974, and the Computer Matching and Privacy Protection Act of 1988. The case puts a spotlight on a broader issue facing government technology leaders: how data collected to administer public benefits can be reused or connected to other government systems. I interviewed two representatives from two groups involved in the lawsuit, Epic and Make the Road States, to discuss the privacy and legal concerns surrounding the policy and what the case could mean for government data sharing and the people who rely on public benefits. First, you'll hear from John Davisson, Deputy Director and Director of Enforcement at the Electronic Privacy Information Center, who says data privacy protections are an essential safeguard against government overreach.
So one of the defining features of TANF, like many federal benefits programs, is that it is principally administered by the states. The federal agency, in this case HHS, plays a significant oversight role, but that is very carefully defined in statute, and the obligation of administering the program or programs is left to the state agencies or the private entities that are administering the program. And so as a result, consistent with traditional privacy principles, it is those entities and state agencies that are administering the programs that have a need to maintain personal information from benefits recipients. The federal government does not generally have a giant pool of benefit recipient data on hand because it doesn't need it to conduct its oversight responsibilities. And fundamentally, what the changes to TANF would do is shift that balance of power dramatically towards HHS by giving them a substantial volume of personal information that currently they don't possess, and giving them asserting quite a bit of additional authority to conduct freewheeling audits and program integrity reviews, as they call them, that really is not rooted in federal law. So for individuals, this means that suddenly, data they provided with the expectation that it would be used by a benefits agency to provide them cash assistance or for the purpose of an after-school program or any other TANF-funded program, they now unbeknownst to them, when they provided their data, that data would be vacuumed up by the federal government and put to all sorts of poorly defined uses in the name of program integrity. But that's a phrase that is extremely broad and poorly defined by the agency in the documentation around these changes.
It seems like it's doing a lot of heavy lifting, and even possibly masking some of what the intentions really are to access this data. For people who might not follow federal policy, what types of data would be accessible not only to the Department of Health and Human Services, that oversees the program, but possibly to other federal agencies?
Well, it's things like name, address, other personal identifying information that you might provide when you apply for benefits, but also things like social security numbers and other sensitive data that an agency at the state level might need to collect in order to determine eligibility and administer benefits. So it's quite a large pool and variety of data that's at stake here.
Mm. And historically, before these changes were proposed and went into effect, what was what was the benefit? What was the idea behind keeping federal access limited and having states have the majority of access to this type of data? Was there any other reasons beyond making sure that sensitive data is protected and only under state control, or was it kind of to prevent federal overreach in this way?
I think it's both. Again, a fundamental principle of privacy protection and what's called the fair information practices is minimization, data minimization. So you don't, as an entity, collect personal information that is not necessary to perform some sort of legitimate defined function. And there are other restrictions that go along with that. But bottom line, the federal government does not have an operational need to acquire this personal information. And that's been true for decades. And that's been the balance for decades. States have had it, the federal government, except subject to narrow statutory exceptions, has not had large quantities of TANF recipient data on hand. And it ensures a number of things. It ensures that personal information is exposed to the lowest risk of misuse. So a state agency, again, has a lawful need in order to carry out a TANF program to collect information about recipients. The federal government generally doesn't. But it's also about data security because, as we know, data breaches are an all too common occurrence. They affect government agencies, same as they do private sector entities. And if you pool vast amounts of personal information, it makes a very attractive target for third-party hackers, including, by the way, nation states. The OPM breach in 2015 is widely attributed to the Chinese government. And that risk remains for any large concentration of personal information at any level of government. So what they're proposing here would dramatically increase the security risks associated with the collection of personal information and the aggregation of that data for the TANF program.
Yeah, it's just opening the channels way more to people that, as you mentioned, don't really need access to this information in order to conduct any operational oversight. States have the authority and have been managing well. It'd be different if the audits were producing, an insane amount of error rates like they are claiming to have found in SNAP and in Medicaid, and wanting to change eligibility requirements and monthly reporting requirements in order to fix that. But that doesn't seem to be the case in terms of the government's arguments for needing access to this data. What are some of the other concerns is if the lawsuit fails to stop them? Do you think this could undermine public trust in any of these social benefits programs?
Well, absolutely. And that's another dimension of privacy protection by government agencies. You provide this information as an individual for a particular purpose, and you expect that the government will protect it against misuse and breach. And that includes these sort of secondary uses that we're seeing HHS propose in very vague terms, that individuals would not have expected when they were signing up for cash assistance or when they were signing up for an after-school program or any other TANF-funded program. And as you see those uses expand and as you start to incorporate things like immigration enforcement or potentially criminal penalties, and especially in the hands of an administration that has shown broad disregard for the protection
Mm.
of personal information, that engenders mistrust, and it makes people unlikely, less likely, that is, to seek the benefits that by law they're entitled to. And so it corrodes the social safety net, and it corrodes trust in government.
So, what is Epic's role in this lawsuit and the legal challenge? What role are you playing? What are your arguments against the Trump administration's overreach and changing the data sharing privacy practices?
Well, the principal framework for the protection of personal information at the federal level is a statute called the Privacy Act of 1974. And that statute does a number of things. It formalizes, or it formalized now over 50 years ago, the ways in which federal agencies are permitted to collect and maintain and disclose personal information. And it has a number of critical obligations, but one of the most commonly known ones is what's called a system of records notice. That's a document that gets published on the Federal Register whenever an agency intends to stand up a new system of records, what we would generally think of as a database,
Sure.
or to significantly modify a system of records. And that includes things like identifying the sources of data, the types of data involved, whose records are at stake, that is, whose personal information is in the system, and also routine uses, as the statute calls them. And those are, among several other statutory exceptions, these are the bases that an agency can use to disclose personal information without the consent of the individual the information needs. And by law, an agency has to put that out into the public and define what those uses are and establish that they are compatible with the original reason the personal information was collected, and give the public an opportunity to provide informed comment and input on the proposed changes or the proposed new system. And here, HHS has really failed at every turn to do that. They have failed to define, with specificity, the new types of data that will be implicated by this expanded collection, to define what these, so-called program integrity reviews really are, who will be involved with them, what will happen to the data once it is fed into one of these programs and obtained by another agency or partner or private entity. All of this is very poorly explained, and we see HHS barreling into this new program. Sorry, just need to adjust this.
No, go for it.
We see HHS barreling ahead with this new regime of maximal data collection and disclosure, and it violates all of these procedural and substantive restrictions of the Privacy Act. So that really is the core of the lawsuit, and it is a statute and a framework that is very near and dear to Epic, and has been at the heart of a lot of litigation over the past 18 months against data aggregation and consolidation at the federal level.
Absolutely. And I mean, I believe that, the social benefits programs, as you mentioned, they collect a lot of sensitive recipient data. And they also have vast collections of past participant data as well that they are looking to go into. You keep mentioning that HHS has failed to define, or they have vague terms in terms of what they want to use the data for, the types of data that they're going to want access to. What exactly are they saying? You keep saying what they're not saying. What are they saying?
Well, the main thing is sort of staking out this authority to conduct program integrity reviews, and again, that's their terminology, and to disclose incident to that supposed authority, a sort of undefined universe of personal information that they have obtained from state agencies. And there are a couple of examples provided, things like social security numbers, but they do not define the universe of data very well. They don't say what the nature of these reviews are. They don't say how the data will be protected when it reaches the other end, or whether it will be deleted. All sorts of really critical features of an effective privacy protection program that are just absent from this documentation.
It doesn't seem like they have a lot of credibility in terms of whether it's precedent with the Data Sharing and Privacy Acts, the Fair Use Acts. It doesn't sound like their argument is a strong one for needing to change the data privacy changes. Are you hopeful that this legal challenge will be successful?
Very hopeful. I think we've seen in a lot of different contexts Privacy Act challenges succeeding against these runaway proposals to consolidate personal data and to grab data from the states. And courts, fortunately, have been pretty consistent in putting federal agencies through their paces and saying, no, this statute exists for a reason. It was a response in the 1970s to runaway data consolidation, or what passed for that at the time. Of course, there's quite a lot less personal information at stake in the 1970s, but it set down an important set of legal obligations based on an important set of privacy principles that continue to mean something today. And courts have really, I think, enforced that well and sort of called the bluff of federal agencies that are saying, we need this for fraud, waste, and abuse. And it's not that simple. It's not a carte blanche that an agency can wave and just kind of brush aside the Privacy Act or other privacy obligations. They really have to do their homework, and they have to, comply with this fundamental privacy management framework.
What are you hearing from states who are administering the TANF program? Are they concerned for their authority, their power to safeguard the data that recipients have offered them?
Yes, and the way is that, and I forget the exact number, I think it might be 21 states have brought suit in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, raising many of the same claims that are raised in our case. So state AGs are watching this closely and are quite concerned with the way that the federal government is behaving and threatening to upend this congressionally established balance of the TANF program.
What do you think this type of federal overreach and the change that could take place for data sharing practices, what do you think it means in the age of AI powered systems as more and more states also adopt AI tools to help them administratively to collect data, to comb through it as well? What do you think it means, or is there a relationship?
There's absolutely a relationship, and I think credibly, with respect to many of these data consolidation efforts, one major fear is this data will be fed into AI tools, black box systems that are used to identify supposed patterns of fraud, waste, and abuse, and that will be used as a basis to withdraw benefits, to cancel benefits, to cancel potentially entire state, block grant funded programs, as they've done and threatened to do many times, and that it will all be done in a way that lacks due process, that lacks adequate safeguards, that is not explainable, but that is weaponized to further this exaggerated narrative of fraud, waste, and abuse.
It does really seem like fraud, waste, and abuse is this umbrella term that is being wielded as a weapon in the name of saving money, in terms of rooting out corruption. It seems like it's kind of being overused in a way by the federal government, because all state and local agencies want to reduce their number of error rates. All state and local agencies want to do their best to not have any fraud in their systems. But the families and the people who are applying for these public benefits, they apply because they need them, to have this threat looming overhead that if their data is not accessible by the federal government, that must be incredibly daunting to be presented with a choice of whether or not to apply for some of these programs and get the services that you need, and weighing it against the privacy concerns that your data might be at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are programs, TANF, SNAP, Medicaid, these are programs that by and large serve people living in poverty, who are in great need and turn to the government, as is their legal right to do, to obtain benefits to support themselves in often very desperate situations. And they should not have to trade away their privacy to do that. By law, they don't have to. And what this TANF and in the other situations, what this is threatening is to upend that and really force this impossible choice on individuals. But it's not the way Congress has designed the social safety net. It's not the way it's supposed to run.
Mm. And if this legal challenge succeeds, what precedent do you hope it sets in terms of this administration going forward to continue trying to access state and local agencies' data for public benefits programs? And especially in the age of AI, do you think some of the privacy acts need to be updated to include protections against these new emerging technologies?
I hope, assuming this case is successful, I hope it will serve as a credible reminder to the federal government that it cannot just grab whatever data at once from states that are administering federal benefits programs. It really has to follow the law. That lesson, by the way, has been reinforced by multiple courts over the past 18 months. Unfortunately, the administration hasn't gotten the message yet and keeps testing the system. But we every time something like this pops up, civil society has been stepping up to ensure that these abuses and these proposals are not going unchallenged. As far as the underlying statute, the Privacy Act, it does need updating. I will say, I think it's a statute that's over 50 years old at this point. It does encode a lot of timeless principles and obligations that still are very important today. So it's not that it's completely outdated, but there are parts that we've learned through experience and through the evolution of technology that should be updated. For example, providing more clearer relief when agencies engage in these kind of systemic abuses, modernizing the system, the framework of systems of records, being quite clear about what agencies can define or assert as these routine uses. Because unfortunately, although the scale of what's going on now is quite a bit greater than what we've seen before, this is not the first time an agency has tried to abuse the routine use framework. Agencies often try to define very broadly the ways they can use personal information. And we're seeing how that can be quite dangerous here. In some cases, it's pretty clear what the proximate motivation is for an agency to collect something. In other cases, it's not clear. And in some cases, I don't think the agencies or the federal government even has the clearest picture of why it wants this data and how it's going to use it. But this administration has undertaken sort of a data maximization campaign, the opposite of what privacy law and privacy protection is supposed to represent. And once you collect that data and put it all in one place and build these linkages and build these national mass databases, they're hard to disassemble, not impossible, but hard. And B, they can be put to all sorts of malign uses that we are not even aware of today, or that the creators of these, expanded systems don't know about today. But the very creation of those databases confers a lot of power on the individuals and the agencies that control them. And that is something we need to be very suspicious of. And the law, federal law does in fact, prohibit the creation of national data banks. But we're seeing a concerted effort to upend that requirement. And this is, it's not just the immediate concerns that frighten us or should frighten us with these data consolidation activities. It is sort of the long-term, what could be done in the future. And that's why we have things like data minimization. That's why we have things like purpose limitations and public notice and comment requirements.
How long could it take to undo the effects of this type of data consolidation by the federal government?
It's hard to give a specific number. I think a future administration that was really committed to disaggregating information that was aggregated might be able to do so relatively quickly. It depends on how the information is stored. It depends on, for example, what kind of AI systems have been trained on the data that would need to be unwound. But there's also this problem of institutional reliance and mission creep. And so even a well-meaning agency under a different administration in the future, it's going to take a lot of work to undo the damage that's been done. And so the temptation might be not to try and to just sort of leave these systems in place and say, well, we're not going to abuse them. We're not going to use them in the way that the previous administration did. But the gun is sort of still sitting there on the table for the next administration, the next administration potentially to use for whatever alarming surveillance purposes it chooses.
Absolutely. So better to stop this train in its tracks now.
Yeah, I mean, right, and I think that's a warning for all Americans, really, that you might be comfortable with the current political leadership, and so it doesn't necessarily occur to you to be concerned about the consolidation of personal information. But your preferred party probably won't be in power forever, and so you need to be worried about what happens when the next administration comes along and has access to that same data.
Mm, well said. Well, John, thank you again so much for joining us today. Gave us a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Sophia.
Now you'll hear from Theo Oshiro, co-executive director of Make the Road States, a nonprofit that advocates for immigrant communities across the country. That is another plaintiff in the lawsuit against the Trump administration. Theo says the change to data sharing practices is forcing vulnerable families to choose between applying for essential services through TANF or safeguarding their personal data. Theo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Sophia. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So, what prompted Make the Road States to join this legal challenge, and what are the goals?
Well, as many people in this country have seen, the Trump administration has launched an all-out assault on immigrant communities. ICE has been, as we have seen in our schools, in people's homes, in our streets, and our courts, and we've seen how families are being ripped apart. At the same time, we know that in our country, right, poverty is very real. And there are families out there who are extremely needy and who depend on programs like TANF to get by. And so when we saw that back in June, there was a proposed rule to essentially share information of TANF applicants and their households to other agencies and to even outside entities, we were extremely concerned about first who they would be sharing that data with, that extremely private data, and what that would do to someone's, desire or anxiety or nervousness to actually apply for TANF. You can imagine if you are applying for a program like TANF, you are in extreme need, and you expect that your information will be kept private. And actually, right, the various federal laws actually say that your information should be kept private. And so when we saw this proposed rule, we were taken aback and really not surprised because of the actions of this administration thus far. But we felt we needed to take action so that TANF recipients and potential TANF recipients could apply with their information safeguarded, and so we could continue to protect immigrant families from being torn apart. So really our goal with this lawsuit is to put a stop to this proposed rule. And actually it's a rule that's already gone into effect as of August 11th of 2026. So our goal is to stop this rule and to ensure that families are able to access TANF with the privacy, safety, and security that they deserve.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. This is one of a long string of efforts by the Trump administration to probe more and more into sensitive data for families who need it. I'm thinking of Medicaid, I'm thinking of SNAP benefits. These are programs that people who really need them reach out to and trust that the federal government is going to safeguard their data. Beyond just the legal question of whether the Department of Health and Human Services can actually change this data sharing policy legally, what's at stake for families that want to continue and need this type of benefits? Are you worried that this is going to put in jeopardy people's ability to feel safe when applying or affect their ability to want to apply?
Absolutely. We believe and we know actually firsthand from our members, the community members that we serve day in and day out, that they are extremely worried about this rule having gone into effect. We have one of our members who actually was applying for TANF for her grandchild, who's a U.S. citizen. She's actually a U.S. citizen herself. But she told us that she actually, after applying, was having panic attacks because she was envisioning ICE coming to her door because she submitted that application. So you can imagine how that grandmother feels, right? Facing the choice between putting food on the table for her grandchild, and potentially putting her family members at risk of deportation at the same time. And we know that it is extremely common in this country for people to live in mixed status households. So we've seen, families who are U.S. citizens whose other family members are in the process, or maybe asylees or have other immigrant statuses. And so, the story of the grandmother in our membership is not unique, right? We know that a lot of families are facing this extremely hard choice, right? Do I apply for this assistance to be able to survive, to be able to put food on the table? Or am I facing potential tearing apart of my family through deportation?
Mm. Do you think that the Trump administration misunderstands, or their rationale is flawed for why, like their argument for wanting federal agencies to be able to access this data, and why families provide this information in the first place?
Well, I mean, it really comes as no surprise, and I honestly don't think that they don't know what they're doing, right? Because time after time, we've seen that a main goal that they have is to collect much private information from ordinary people in the United States as they can. And we know that this information is extremely valuable to them, particularly because we know that they are providing that information to outside corporations who actually benefit a lot, right, from accessing that information. So we are extremely troubled by the fact that they're continuing to do this, continuing to ramp up their efforts to essentially surveil their own citizens. And it is worth noting that, TANF is not actually open to the undocumented. It's a program that actually has very strict rules. Each state establishes very strict eligibility standards on income, on legal status, right? Only qualified, um, you can, you have to be a qualified, you have to be in a qualified immigrant status to be able to access TANF. So we know that it is not the undocumented who are accessing TANF, but we do know that this administration is trying to compile as much information as they can to try to tear apart families and to try to use really all Americans' data in a way that is not only nefarious, but I think wealth building for the administration and its allies.
I'm so glad you brought up government surveillance. That was going to be honestly my next question for you. Are you or your members concerned that if they continue to succeed and continue to have access to recipient data, that it's going to be combined with other data sets and used to survey citizens, undocumented immigrants, those with documented and protected status? What are you really afraid of if this goes continued and unchallenged?
I think that it is not, fiction to say that in this day and age, this administration is using people's private information in a variety of ways, right? We know that private corporations and many agencies have access to troves and troves of personal information of ordinary Americans, right? From social security numbers to addresses to license plates, right? We've all have heard of license plate readers, and many of our
Oh yeah, they exist. They exist. One of my colleagues actually reports pretty extensively on how many state and local agencies are incorporating license plate readers into their operations.
Exactly. So imagine, a reality which is actually not, it is very real now, where an ICE agent, as an example, on their mobile phone can have access to these troves of information, and to be able to pinpoint someone's location to a T, right? And we have to really ask ourselves, is that the kind of country that we want to live in? A country where very, very poor people go to apply for a benefit because they cannot put food on the table and need assistance. And for that to be a piece of this puzzle that is actually making a pretty terrifying whole, right? Which is the surveillance of the American people.
Mm. Yeah, you do paint a really terrifying picture. And I'm thinking back to what you said earlier about one of your members who was applying for TANF for her granddaughter and being fearful of providing this information and having to choose. I know this lawsuit is being brought about, and I really do hope it succeeds. I'm curious if the Trump administration succeeds, what do you hope TANF agencies do in response? What do you hope that they offer either recipients, past recipients, people who are trying to access these benefits? What do you hope they do in order to provide not only protections to their data, but also access to benefits that they clearly need?
Well, it is worth noting that in addition to our lawsuit, which we're so proud to join with Democracy Forward, Epic, and Common Cause, right, to stop this unlawful attempt of the administration, also governors of various states have filed a similar lawsuit, right? So we see that various states are actually very concerned about the impact that this could have on their states. And so we think that we will be successful in court given the various pieces of or of law, right, that apply here, like the Social Security Act, the Privacy Act, and many other federal statutes that actually we believe make this kind of sharing of information unlawful. Not to mention its capricious and arbitrary nature. And so we believe we're going to be successful in court. Um, if not, right, in the unlikely event that we are not successful, we would want states to figure out any other options they have to protect the information of applicants, right? Obviously, states are in a very difficult position with the federal administration. We know that states, in my work at Make the Road States, we've pushed states to step up, right, and pass laws that actually protect immigrant communities. In the state where I am, in New York, and other states as well, we've been successful at getting states to step up, and so we want them to similarly do that and find any other options that they may have. And at the same time, I think it is up to us all to really inform applicants about what is the current state of affairs, right? We must inform applicants of what their risks are as they're applying for any benefit, and it is really, if that is to come to reality, it really is a sad reality, right? That someone would have to get uh, essentially do a risk assessment uh, as they're trying to put food on their table for their families.
Yeah, it really is a heartbreaking situation. I'm thinking also about the ripple effects this is going to have if more people who would originally apply for this type of access, this type of benefits, are feeling and are weighing their options, as you mentioned, the risk assessment, and feeling that it's not worth it. I'm imagining the ripple effects this is going to have in communities in regions across the country, how much more dependency and pressure they're going to have on community food banks, how much more pressure they're going to depend on school lunch programs, how much more pressure it's going to be on other like public access benefits, Medicaid, SNAP, that are already feeling the pressure from the changes under HR1 to comply with the federal eligibility requirements and to reduce their error rates. It does feel like the perfect storm where families who need to access these benefits might get trapped in the crosshairs.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the ripple effects are real and we're already seeing them. We've had, at Make the Road States, across all of our states, we've seen a decline in people actually applying for these kinds of benefits. And because of the extreme worry and anxiety that people have about what might happen if they do apply. So the ripple effects are real. They're already happening. Our goal is to stop this rule in its tracks so that people can apply for this life-saving assistance when they need it without that anxiety and that huge risk to their families. And I think it is extremely worrying that we're in a day where this administration is having that effect, and I think purposefully trying to dissuade people from applying for life-saving assistance. and also in a reality where we're seeing families torn apart day in and day out. We've seen the measures that ICE has taken in states across the country. And we know that this is just sadly another tool that they're trying to add to their toolbox of terror and separation of families in communities across the country.
Mm. What do you tell your members who reach out and tell you that they are concerned and are looking to make the road states to help them make the best choice possible for them and their families?
Well, what we tell them is, join our fight, right? Because we know that our organization can only have impact if we have, a base of people who speak out, right, on these, on this kind of action. Whether it's the federal government or anyone else, right, that's trying to create harm in low income immigrant communities. And so it is extremely important that people across the country get involved, right? I know that might seem counterintuitive, right? That if you are facing these risks and this kind of anxiety, you might think, well, let me retreat, let me hide, right, from everything that's happening. But what we know is that actually time and time again, change comes about when people actually get involved and do something about the things that they're facing. And in this case, this Trump administration's proposed rule. And so what we tell people is the reality of the situation, right? The rule has gone into effect, but we filed a lawsuit. We're confident that we will win. And at the same time, we tell them it is currently in effect, right? And give them the information in a very straightforward way. And help them make that very difficult decision. I think it is, again, extremely important that people seek out resources and information. At Make the Road States, we also have direct services. We have lawyers who can help inform people. So I think understanding your rights, and also, and getting involved in organizations that are fighting for the rights of not only immigrant communities, but really anyone in this country is extremely important, right? Get involved, understand the current situation, and figure out ways to fight back.
Mm. Well, Theo, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Well said.
Thanks so much, Sophia.
Thank you. Thank you both to John Davisson from Epic and Theo Oshiro from Make the Road States for joining us. You can subscribe to the Priorities Podcast at prioritiespodcast.com and wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, be sure to leave a review or a rating on the podcast page. That small extra step helps more people like you find the show. This podcast is a production of Scoop News Group in Washington, D.C. Our producer, Carlin Fisher, puts it together. Until next week, I'm Sophia Fox-Owell. Thanks for listening.